Hello folks. In today's video we're going to actually go through and use Phaser to set up our elements of the screen, the sprites. We're going to set up the bricks at the top, the ball, and the player paddle. We're not going to set up player movement just yet, but we'll go through and set up the sprites. Now you're going to be working in your Breakout game template that we started last time, and I'm going to make a number of changes to basically all the files to update it for this new game. We set up some initial just structure, and so you got used to seeing the functions last time. We're going to add a little more to each of those areas today. So the first file I'm going to be working in is the index.html. This is your basic website, your HTML code. And for this one, we don't have to add much. I'm going to go right below the H1 breakout line, and I'm going to add a div. And we're going to give it the ID game. And that will set up an area on the screen, a new div called game. And we're going to do that to actually customize the size of the area we're going to be playing in. Next up, let's go to the style.css file and make some changes there. In the style.css, currently we have HTML, display flex. What we're going to be doing with Phaser will allow us to move some stuff around here. So we don't need all this stuff here. Actually, we can get rid of display flex. We're not going to need that anymore. Align item center and text line. Actually, we'll keep text align and dump the other stuff. I'm going to go up here to HTML. I'm going to do a comma. I'm going to add body. And under center, I'm going to do margin 0 auto. Padding 0. Width 100%. Height 100%. Under here, we'll use the div we just set up for game. It will set up a margin of 10 px auto, padding 0 px, width 800 px, and height 640 px. Now what this will do is, and the reason why we moved to this model, is that it's going to be easier for you as beginners to understand the spacing inside of our player space. Because we set up a div called game, we set up a width and a height. We know roughly the position of where things are going to be inside of that div. So that offers a little more insight into our placement of things. Okay, that's it for HTML and style.css. Let's move into the app.js file. Sorry, script.js file here. Okay, in your JS file, JavaScript file, we're going to do some pretty substantial changes here. And the reason is that now that we know a little bit more about objects, we can make this area here, all the configuration settings, we can make that a little bit clearer to read. And we're going to make some changes to the preload. We're going to put a bunch of stuff in the config file. So let's do this. Let's take everything in preload in between the brackets, and we'll just get rid of it for right now. And then up here, the var game, I'm going to go and make a couple of spaces above it. And we'll set up a new constant. We're going to call it config. And just like we learned about them, this is going to be an object. There's going to be, so we set up with brackets, and then we're going to set up a number of key value pairings to set up our configuration files. Basically, we're going to take this right here as it's inside the parentheses, and we're going to be adding more. So we just want to separate it out. And you could, technically, I guess you could do it either way, but I like this way better. It's a little bit easier to read. So we're going to add a type, Phaser auto. The other benefit of doing it this way is that we don't have to go in here and know all the parameters here to know the placement of what, where everything is. Here we can just set up a key name, so type Phaser auto, and that's how the browser is going to render this. We're going to set the parent. It's a lot easier just to see where things are, right? Parent's going to be what part of the HTML page are we attaching this game to, and we just set up a parent div inside of here, right? On line 15, we have div ID equals game. So I'll go back here and we basically put that name in of what we want. So game. I'm going to set up a background color, capital C. And this can take, we had hexadecimal. You can add hexadecimal, or you can just do plain, like the English words for the HTML colors. So I'm just going to do black. You can add whatever color you'd like. I just think black's going to stand out with our blocks and the ball and the paddle. Okay, width, we'll do 800. Make sure that this is, to make sure everything fits nicely on the screen and everything works, I'm going to make this to be either the same size or smaller than the parent div we set up in CSS. Width 800, height 600, scale. Okay, so if you're playing on a cell phone or you're playing on in a window and you move the you move the window size around, you make the screen smaller or bigger. This is we're going to tell Phaser to resize that space. So let's do mode Phaser.scale resize. Make sure it's on all caps. Okay, and that will resize it. And here we can set up our auto center, capital C, Phaser.scale, center underscore both. And that's going to make sure it's centered from top down and centered left to right, vertically and horizontally. Okay. Next up, we'll set up our scene. And this is where we tell it what functions to load. So we can shortcut this by just doing preload, create, update. We're going to be using physics to detect collisions. So here I'm going to do default arcade. Phaser has 3 different type of physics engines that we could use. Arcade is the simplest one to use and basically the most straightforward, and it's going to do everything that we need it to do. So we're just going to stick with arcade for right now. For arcade, we could set up custom configuration settings for the arcade, and one of them is gravity. And I'm going to set this to be false. So we know the idea is that you want collisions, so we're going to have physics inside of in the game, but we don't want gravity turned on. We don't want the bricks and the paddle falling. We're just going to detect a collision and send the ball in a direction based upon where it hits on the paddle. So basically, it's going to bounce off the walls, but we don't need gravity for that. If you want a bit of fun, you could turn gravity on and see what happens, but for our actual game, we're not going to need it. Okay, and that's it for our configuration settings. This is a lot easier than if we had to list them all off here. So what do we need to add here? Well, actually, we're going to take everything. So we can leave our new game. It equals Phaser new game, except in the parentheses all the way down here. I'm going to delete all that. And now we can just pass in the config, which means that it will go here and it will read all of our configuration settings of the game. Okay, so that handles that. Next up, right above preload, what we're going to do is we're going to set up a number of variables, and these are the variables that we're going to be using later on. So we're going to make them global because one is just easier to do right now, and 2, we kind of need to make them global because we're going to be setting them up in preload and then customizing them in create. So we can do let player, and you have a couple options here. You could do let ball, let's see. We have our bricks, blue bricks. So in any case, what we can do is actually instead of doing this let, we can shortcut it just to do up here. We can just do ball blue bricks. We could just do it like that, and it does the same thing. So let's do that and make it a little bit clearer. So we instantiate them. We let the program, we let the browser know we're going to be using these later on, but we don't need to define them right away. Okay. So now that we've set up our variables we're going to be using throughout the program, the next thing we can do is preload. And for preload, you can think of this as like a loading screen. That there's too much for the browser to do at once. It's going to try to load up the images. The images can be, these are small images we're going to be using, so they're not a major concern. But if you use anything larger than, a couple hundred kilobytes or maybe even a megabyte, you're talking 2 or 3 megabytes, 5 megabytes, 8 megabytes. That's a lot for the computer to load up fairly quickly. And what you'll see is that you'll get image pop in. And we definitely don't want image pop in. We don't want the person starting to play the game and all of a sudden more bricks are popping into the screen. That wouldn't be good. So how are we going to solve for that? So what we do is we set up a loading screen, and what preload will do is it will load all of the stuff here previous to the page fully rendering. So instead of things coming in later, it's all going to be loaded at once. So some games, to solve for this, I mean, the loading could be fairly substantial if you're using pretty large images. They'll have a loading screen. We're not going to need it. Our images are not that big. It's not going to take that long to load them up. But we're going to need to load these images before we can actually start using them, before we want the page to load up. So for this, we're going to use our this keyword, load, and this referring to the preload. Okay, so this load image, and we could set up the name. Let's say ball. And where are we going to find this? And so this is a file path. And what we have is we're going to add them to our assets in a little bit. So we can set our file path to be assets. And then we just say what the file name is. We'll just do PNG, ball.png. There's nothing in assets yet, but we're going to add them in a little bit. Okay. And then we do this again. This load image, brick 1, assets, brick1.png. This load image, brick2, assets, brick2.png. This load image, brick3, assets, brick3.png. Okay, and the last thing, this load image, paddle, assets, paddle.png. Okay, so what this will do is before the game even loads, it will load up all these images. Okay, next thing is we're going to go down to create. Create is going to run one time at the beginning of the game, and one only once. So this is the stuff that we don't necessarily need. We can have the game loaded up, right? We can have all the assets loaded, and then we can do things to them. Now, because what we just did essentially with the preload and this load.image, this.load.image, is we loaded up the images. We told the browser that we're going to be using these images inside of the program and to just load them up in like the browser storage and keep them there. If we were to run this right now, we're going to see nothing. Because, well, one, we did set the background color to be black, right? But if we said something like blue, okay, we're still not going to see anything. And that's because we need to go through and actually tell it that we want these images to appear there. We need to tell it to load in something, right? So this is what you should have. Although it seems I have a bracket here. I have a missing bracket somewhere. Oh yeah, right at the top. I don't know how that got in there. There we go. Okay. All right. So yeah, we need to go through and we need to tell the game engine, we need to tell Phaser and JavaScript browser that these images we loaded up are going to be sprites. All right. So there's certain things you can do to images. You can give images a place value. You can give them a XY coordinate on the screen. But you can't you can't detect physics with images, with just PNG or JPEG images. We can do these things with sprites. Okay, and sprites are your traditional 2D game image that appears in almost every game, right? It's called a sprite. And a sprite, we can add in collision boxes around this, right? So you should be, if you've ever played a game, right, you should be familiar with the idea of collision boxes, right? So we can do that to sprites. But right now, these images being loaded and don't have any of that. So we got to create our sprites. Okay, and let's add single sprites. So let's first add in our player. Now we defined player above and let player. So here, all we have to do is tell it, the game engine, we're redefining player to be this physics add sprite. And here what we're going to do is we're going to add in a couple of parameters. We're going to give it 400. This is going to be your X position. Let's see what do I do here. There we go. 400 for the actually, let me hit enter on this one. There we go. Okay, 400 for that. We'll get 600. There's the second one, and this is the Y position. I don't need those comments. There we go. And last thing is the name or the key of the image that we're going to use. So up here we set up image names, right? We told it what picture to load up, and we gave it a name. Here we have to basically tell it, okay, player is going to get what image as its sprite, and we'll call this paddle. All right. Okay. And so this is the thing we preloaded above. All right. Now if we run it, let's see, do we have our, all right, cool. So we see that we have an image on the screen. We have a black background. It's just a green box with a line through it because we haven't added in the asset yet. We will. Let's just continue setting this up. Okay, so that's our first one. And the other thing that's a single is going to be ball equals this dot physics add sprite. $400, $500, and ball. So you can change these values to what you like. But if we run it one more time, and make this a little bit bigger. Okay, we see the paddle here and the ball that's going to be up here. So let's talk for a minute about these positions. So normally in school you learn that like a Cartesian coordinate system, right? Where you have an XY grid and the origin 0, X, 0, Y is in the center, right? And there's X above, and then it should be X to the left and negative X to the, you have positive X to the right, negative X to the left, positive Y to the top, and negative Y to the bottom. Well, graphics and browsers and most game engines don't work on those type of coordinate systems. Origin, or 0x, 0y, is actually in the top left corner. X and Y still go in the same direction, but there's no negatives. Actually, I guess negatives would be off the screen, but essentially you don't have to worry about negatives. So 0, 0 starts at the top left, X goes positive all the way to the right, and Y goes positive all the way down. So when we say we're creating it at 400, we mean 400X, so right here, and we're creating it at 600Y down here. Okay, 500Y would be closer to 0, 0 at the top, so 500Y, excuse me, for this 500Y will be a little bit further up than 600, all right? If we change this to be like 200, we see this thing go, there we go, right to the top, okay? And if we change it to be, say, 0, will it even show up? Yes, it will. Okay, so it's peeking out halfway. So it does, obviously, the image is split. Its origin of the image must be in the center. So in that case, we can see 0 there. But we want it down the bottom, so we're going to do 500. And how do you know like what your sizes should be? How big? Well, we set that up at the beginning, right? So we set our height to be 800, our width to be 800, so our left to right, our X to be 800, and our height to be 600. So it tells us basically our max limits of these items. And with the ball at 500, it's essentially 100 pixels off from the bottom of the screen. So there it is there. That's 100 pixels right there. Okay. So we have our ball and we have our ball and our player. And next thing is we can add in Add Sprites Groups. And for this one, we don't have to set up our bricks one by one. Phaser has this pretty neat feature. We can do this, physics, add group, and we can pass in an object, a key value pair. Make this a little bit bigger here so you can see. Okay, so instead of this this physics add sprite, we do this physics add group. And here what we can do is we can pass in the key, the name of the thing we want to add, which is brick 1 up here, brick 1. And we're going to add in repeat, set the number of times we want to repeat that brick. Set XY. X is 80. Y is 200. Step X is 70. So this sets up the initial X position of 80, the Y position of all of them in a row at 200. And then step X is how often are we going to space these out on the X axis. There is a step Y, but we're not going to use it here. Okay, so that sets up the first group. Add sprite groups. This will be blue bricks. Add blue bricks. And if we run it, we should see a row. We see nothing here. What happened here? Oh, do I have something wrong? Blue bricks, add physics. Let's see, step X, step Y, 70. What am I forgetting here? Oh, I forgot a colon. There we go. Now run it. Okay. And we see our row of bricks here. All right, we're going to fill this in with the images a little bit. All right, let's go through it and let's add our next set, which is our yellow bricks. Yellow bricks equals this dot physics. Add group. And same thing, key brick 2. Repeat 9. Set XY. X80. We're going to have this line up with the first row of bricks. Y, we're going to make this a little bit further up. 125. Step X70. Okay. And next thing is let's set up our add red bricks. And red bricks equals this dot physics. Add group. Key brick 3. Repeat 9. Set XY. X is 80. We'll leave it the same. Y, we're going to bring it up a little bit further to the top, 50. And you can customize those spacings. Step X70. Okay, so this sets up all our bricks. We have our red bricks, our yellow bricks, our blue bricks, our players, and now we have our brick rows and our ball and our player ready to go. So now what we can do is actually go through and just add those assets. I'll provide the link to find these pictures, and they'll be on my GitHub page. And so you can do is you can go right to it, right click on it and say, let's see, we'll click on it. There we go, opens up. So there's the ball, or you can right click and say save image as. And once you download it, we're going to add it to this. We can just do either add file, and you can drag and drop the file in, or actually, you know what? Yeah, upload file. There we go. So you upload file, select it, make sure it's in the assets folder. If it's not, the program won't be able to see it because that's where we told it to look. So we're going to add those in. Okay, I just uploaded some of them. If they are not in the folder, like I said, you want to take them and you want to make sure you drag them into the assets folder so that they are all here. Okay, and now with all the assets there, we told it where to look. If we click run, we'll see that all the images loaded in. The balls and the paddle, the ball and the paddle all got replaced with the actual images that we told it to look for. Like I said, these spacings here are spaced out at 70 each. Okay, you know, if you're doing this yourself and you wanted to know exactly where things are, you know, I sort of pre-planned a lot of this, so I knew exactly where to space them out. But if you wanted to space yours a little bit closer, a little bit further apart, or actually add in another row, you could add another row. You'd have to get a brick image, but essentially you could just take one of these images, recolor it, and make it a different color. And it would be the same thing. You can go through and add it and determine your rows. So, for instance, step 70, we want to space them out a little bit longer. This is the yellow bricks. We can change it to 90. Reload it, and we see that it gives a little more space between each one. If we want to move them up or down, we just change the Y value on it. So lower would be higher. So if I wanted to make this closer to the red bricks, I could do like 100. And we see it moves closer. We want to move it down. Let's see, our bottom one is at 200. So we could do 175. The Y. And there you go. It's much closer to the bottom. So if you want your rows compacted, you can just change these values. Remember, it starts in the top left, 0, 0. Y gets bigger as it goes down. X gets bigger as it moves to the right. Okay, so for this one, I'm going to put it back to 125. Okay, and so yeah, we have our rows set up, ready to go. We have our brick set up, and we have our paddle set up. So at this point, we're all set, and we're ready to take a look at player movement in the next video. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.